who I'm sure needs no introduction, but I'll give a wee one anyway. Dr. Alexandra Sanmark, who of course is the reader in medieval archaeology at the Nordic Studies Centre. And to whom is it?
Yeah, it's just that the touch screen is playing. So this is my new touch screen.
Oh,
it's just slightly tweaked, but it's...
Oh, it's short, that's good. So, where was I? Reader in Medieval Archaeology at the Nordic Studies Centre, of course, here at UHI, and one of the conveners of this wonderful conference. So, welcome, Alexandra. And the title of the paper is now At the Assembly, a Study of Ritual Space.
Thank you. So I was pleased to hear Victoria's paper, and I was pleased when I saw your abstract as well, I have to say, so I put you into this session. We will be returning to Grimness now a little bit sort of towards the end of this paper. So this is then focusing on assembly sites, and I'm going to be discussing rituals carried out at assembly sites. And I will be focusing on these two sites, Arnenshög and Gamla Uppsala, both located in Sweden, about 80 kilometers apart. So in the research that I've been doing on assembly sites in the past, I have shown that they were located in carefully selected places, and that the sites were designed and then constantly rebuilt, remodeled by the elite to communicate their power to the population. And this view is reinforced by recent archaeological investigations at these two particular sites. So in this paper, I am bringing together archaeological evidence and written sources, and it covers a time period spanning more than 1,000 years. So we start in the Roman Iron Age and go to the late medieval era. So the reason I'm doing this is partly due to the different types of evidence used, but it also connects to the recent research showing that many Scandinavian assembly sites were extremely long-lived and were the focus of gatherings in various forms from the late Bronze Age or the early Iron Age until the late Middle Ages. There are some seats. So, and this is exactly what we see at these two sites. I don't intend to try and explain and interpret the Iron Age archaeology through these late medieval written sources, but I think we can use them to show that the different types of source materials can tell us that there are certain practices that continued and were present for very long periods of time, although with rituals their content and meaning is of course ever changing. So the majority of the rituals that I will be discussing today are elite driven, but there are also examples of rituals that may have been created and directed by the lower echelons of the community. But the overriding aim of assembly rituals was presumably to create a communal identity and a collective memory among the people gathered. And these rituals can be defined as commemorative practices. And an important part of the arguments that I'm presenting today is that memory is not restricted to the mind, but it's a bodily experience created through sensory perceptions such as visuals, smells, and tastes. And this taps into the very nature of commemorative rituals, which entail performances such as evocation and declarations of key components of ritual narratives. So bodily movements, gestures, postures, motion. So also we have dramatic spectacle tends to be employed to strengthen memory creation. And a key component of this type of ritual is that they are performative. So their very performance accomplishes a change in the world. So rituals that are enacted as part of commemorative practices, they were designed to produce the continuation of tradition, but since they were played out intermittently, their contents has subtly changed through performance. They tend to be formulated in advance. They follow a pattern devised by the ruling elite. So this means that rulers could, through the use of carefully planned and executed rituals, transmit ever-changing messages to the audience, and indeed different messages to different groups in the people gathered. So I will give you an overview of the archaeology of the two sites that I'm discussing today, starting with Arnhenshög. So this is then documented as an assembly site or a thing site between the 14th and the 16th century. But the evidence is to suggest that it was used for assemblies much earlier. So this is a palimpsest of monuments. As I said, it starts in the Bronze Age, although that's not visible on the surface. And then we have a number of burials in the migration period, and we have this very large mound, which as yet is undated, and a number of stone settings as well. This is the site from a slightly different angle. And this area here, you can never see in the aerial photograph that the grass is slightly different colour. And that whole area shows a huge scattering of hearth material, pottery, burnt remains. And it seems to be a massive campsite where people have gathered, and it stretches for more than 1 kilometre in length. But there are absolutely no remains of buildings found so far. And then we have a runestone here, and dated to the first half of the 11th century, has the inscription Folkvidr, raised all of these stones in memory of his son Hedin, Önunder's brother. So this text is believed to refer to a long row of standing stones, but it could also be an allusion to other standing stones on the site, because as we saw, there are numerous there. So in the immediate vicinity of this site, along a prominent esker, there are a large number of Iron Age burials, often placed in layers of top of each other. Some are clearly of elite status, such as an unusually richly furnished weapon burial, dated from the second half of the 6th century, very similar to the finds we get at Gamla Uppsala. And the recent fieldwork carried out by my colleague Sarah Semfall and I, which comprised of geophysical survey and targeted excavation. And what we did find were the remains of a large wooden monument. So you see all these other stone, so I showed on the aerial photographs, and if you make out this line of wooden posts here, that's stretched from the watercourse and 200 metres across the site. And I'll come back to this one later. The radiocarbon dates that we have, we can't actually really give a very precise date, but it seems most likely that it postdates the Roman Iron Age and the migration period, most likely 7th century. Gamla Uppsala. So Gamla Uppsala then, referred to by Adam of Bremen most famously, also Snorre Sturluson, as the assembly of all Swedes. So the supreme assembly in the early Swedish kingdom. And where also we have the descriptions of a large sacrificial feast held here. And many people have studied all these different sources, written sources describing Gamla Uppsala, and for a long time they were seen as very dubious. But through detailed examination, it's now argued that there seem to be rather accurate descriptions of what happened at Gamla Uppsala. So this definitely was a site of assembly and sacrificial gatherings. So this too then is a multi-period site spanning a sizable area, a huge number of burials dated from the early Iron Age through to the Viking period. There are also 2 or even 3 very large hall buildings with outstanding material culture, metal production, settlement remains, etc. And we've got, of course, these major burial mounds, and the 3 of them are particularly prominent, known as the Royal Mounds, similar in size to the large mound at Arnhenshög. And these were then initially constructed around burials and were gradually extended over time. And this is the process that lasts between around 550 to 700 AD. So also this site then has been subject to recent excavations, and they revealed a monument that was similar to the one that we found at Arnhenshög, although on a much larger scale. So this is the first part. You can make out these pits here, there are the remains of wooden post settings, so the stone settings for the posts, the non-removed, but you can see how it follows in, and the Gamla Uppsala site is right here behind the trees. So this row here is 900 meters long. And it leads to the site. So this is the one I just showed you, and here we've got the burials, the three large burial mounds here. So we'll come back to this in more detail later. So this, this very recent excavation, and it's a huge, it's a building of new roads and a tunnel. So it's a massive project that's taken time to publish. But so the dates and the interpretation is still ongoing. But it seems most likely that this monument was then constructed in the 7th century. You can see another section of it right there. So, thinking about Gamla Uppsala and Arnens Hög, it's very clear then that we have these sites with very similar monuments erected then at these sites of gathering, and they are likely to be contemporary. So the question is, what was their purpose? So the first point to make is that these monuments were then erected on elite sites, as I've explained to you, with their roots in the Roman Iron Age, if not earlier, and they really must have stood out in the surrounding landscape. These monuments are so far unique to Sweden, or to this part of Sweden, and the investment in terms of planning, logistic resources, as well as manual labour would have been colossal. And these achievements can only be carried out by a well-organised group of people under strong leadership. So a scenario of intense competition between these two neighbouring elites around Gamla Uppsala and Arnens Hög can be envisaged. So, but bearing in mind then that assembly sites tend to have specific landscape characteristics and archaeological features, which can be seen as signposts to these signs of power. The inspiration and borrowing between thing sites is particularly evident in the provinces of Uppland and Sörmland. Gamla Uppsala was in Uppland in Sweden. We have a number of powerful families competing over the control of thing sites, in effect claiming that their site was the one to use through a combination of runic inscriptions and assembly sites with appropriate features. I've got, of course, the very famous Alexandra thing site, which has 2 rune stones stating that this is the assembly created in memory of their father, and it seems to have been in function for a very short period of time when another important man created a different site slightly further away. So there seems to be a lot of shifting with assembly sites. So, going back to Arnens Hög and Gamla Uppsala, I'd like to suggest that the similarities that we can see between these two sites suggest a process of ongoing rivalry, where the bar was kind of pushed higher and higher in terms of site architecture. And there are other similarities than the wooden monuments. Both sites are surrounded by large cemeteries, and a few kilometres away there are wealthy boat burials as well. And this fits into the overall pattern, what we can see in the first millennium AD, where we have got a number of elite central places. We've got Uppåkra in Skåne, Sweden, and Gudme in Denmark, for example, and they emerged at this time. So these sites were driven by a change in power relations. Power was transferred from extended kin group to monopoly of rulership by leading persons or families. So the archaeological evidence suggests that ritual formed an important part of political power, and a degree of competition in terms of ritual performance can be surmised. So, I'd like to suggest that the wooden monuments were constructed by itinerant rulers with the intention of creating a collective memory of their rulership and law, and an extension, a collective identity for the people using this space. So in this way they could inscribe their presence in the landscape, making their imprint on the population also when the rulers were absent. And these aims cannot be achieved through monument creation alone. If you think about material culture, needs to be used in order to gain meaning. So to generate meaning and remembrance, therefore, these monuments needed to be incorporated into routinized practices. Think about everyday objects, this may involve rather mundane tasks, but for monuments, on the other hand, rituals and spectacle tend to be employed to physically impress collective memory onto the people present. So therefore, as I suggested above, the monuments and honours heard, for them to fulfil their purpose, commemorative practices were most likely performed. It would also be desirable for Iron Age rulers to confirm their place as legitimate heirs, approved by the ancestors. So through the various monuments at Arneshög and Gamla Uppsala, these rulers could create a place for their family in their genealogy of the landscape. Using the same concepts, the monuments may have been intended to forget previous rulers by overwriting their history in the landscape. So in this way, the monuments served as commemorabilia, or they indexed past events, people and objects, offering a direct access to the past. And at the same time, they could promote cultural transmission and link to the future and providing information on the rulers. And of course, the effectiveness of a ritual is judged on how well it's remembered, bearing in mind then that memory is a bodily experience. To ensure maximum effect and memory creation, a successful ritual tends to involve dramatic performances and essentially spectacular objects. And these wooden monuments, I think, can without doubt be classified as such by the sheer size, scale and prominent display in the landscape. I mean, these posts, which obviously an estimation is that they were perhaps 8 to 10 metres tall. And we can look at that also from the size of the pits. These are about more than 1 metre across and filled with huge amounts of stone. So sacrifices and executions then, which seem to have been part of the assembly rituals in varying degrees, belong to the most dramatic forms of spectacle. At Gamla Uppsala, there is archaeological evidence and written evidence of sacrifices. Deposits of burnt and unburnt bone from horse, pig and cattle were recovered from the post holes, as well as the complete skeleton of a young dog. So the presence of horse and dogs and skulls in particular adds to the ritual nature of these remains. And it seems that these bodies may have been hung from the posts or potential crossbeams. The written sources suggest that sacrifices and or executions may have taken place in later periods as well. Adam von Bremen, he stated about the large sacrifice lasting 8 days was held once every 8 years. Each day, 1 human and several animals were sacrificed, giving a total of 72. Similar descriptions of sacrificial gatherings were found in other sources, such as the Chronicle of Tidmar and Messeberg, for example. So dramatic spectacle is particularly valuable for the creation of long-term memories with little need for reiteration, and that could explain the long intervals between the large sacrificial gatherings. It is possible that the human sacrifices described by Adam were instead people who were executed as part of assembly meetings. Depends on your definition of sacrifice, of course. This practice is occasionally mentioned in sagas and sometimes describes royal actions, but they seem to take place at top levels assemblies only. This idea is supported by the geographical study of execution sites and thing sites, so showing that they seem to coincide only at the very top level sites. So public executions and the display of rotting corpses would presumably have been a very effective way for the rulers to show the power of their law. Animal sacrifices and executions may well have taken place at Arneshög too, but there is little direct evidence of this. Bearing in mind that violence and murder were taboo within the assembly sites, the effects of executions or sacrifices ordered by the ruler must have been even more powerful. Also, ritual language and performative speech seem to have been employed for additional spectacle. In medieval Iceland, the law was recited, possibly sung, at the assembly over a 3-year period, and alliteration, rhythm and rhyme were most likely employed in the transmission of such oral traditions across Scandinavia too. So adding to the ritual nature of the meetings. Also, legal proceeding may, at least in part, have been carried out in verse. The known runic inscriptions by assembly sites are written in poetic metre, and in early medieval Ireland there's a clear overlap between the roles of poets and law speakers. And this, of course, also links in with the wealth of legal references in the Eddic poetry. And the ritual nature of the procedures in terms of language has also been highlighted by the Norwegian historian Sverre Bagge. So through detailed study of saga narratives, he demonstrated that the slightest deviation in words or phrases would result in the case being thrown out. So these aspects may have added then to the ritual experience, would at the same time have acted as a boundary, limiting access to those who were able to perform in the correct manner. So, the wooden monuments again. So this is Arnund Hög again, just superimposed on this map from 1689. So we've got this is the wooden monument that I've shown you. This is a watercourse, and these here are roads leading into the site, and this is an area of wetland. So what we can see here is a site that is fully enclosed. So there's one open side of the site, this one here, and this is where we find the monument. It's difficult to know exactly where it stops because this area becomes very wooded, but it seems that this area of wetland extended all the way here. So it stopped probably presumably there, and it starts just above the watercourse, and then we've got the watercourse enclosing the rest of the site. So we have an enclosed space in the middle. And this enclosed area most likely represented a sacred space to which only the very top of the elite had access. So by the time of the written sources at least, within this space, thin peace and a variety of other special regulations applied. So all in all, the enclosed area here at Arnund Hög, and we see this pattern repeated at many assembly sites. It's just particularly striking here. So they most likely represented symbolic islands. So this idea is reflected by the archaeology of things sent across the Norse world. As I said, water in some form is frequently occurring, or I don't know if I have found one single assembly site that is not close to water or directly next to water in some form. So water seems to have been a very important boundary feature. And of course the importance of water comes across in the written sources, from the early Eddic poetry to the provincial laws. And in this context then, it's relevant that the wooden monuments at Arnund Hög and Gamla Uppsala, they both start at watercourses. So Gamla Uppsala then, water seems to have been a particularly prominent feature. So by reconstructing water levels here, just roughly reconstructed, we can see that, so this is, the legend's missing, but these are wetland areas here. And of course you've got a watercourse connecting into that. So we have more or less an open space then, with wetlands in the middle, and there are also, through aerial photographs you can trace, one, possibly two large barrier mounds situated within this enclosed area. And traditionally, this is known as the Thing Mound. This was used by kings from the 16th century for declarations, etc. But if we're going to actually, even if, I don't know if we're even looking for Thing Mounds, but if we were, something for people to stand on and perform from, then these ones here, or if there is much, then this is much more likely. If you think about enclosed space, it seems that also it's likely that entry into this space was restricted and ritualized. So we can imagine then that the wooden monuments served as monuments of choreography. The archaeology suggests motion, such as ritual processions, along the rows of tall posts towards a particular point of entrance into the sacred space. So motion and ritualized entry to the assembly. Again, so we're coming back to Grimnismeld, stanza 29. we've got, so we read it again, Hermit and Nerton to Kennelogan, these Thor must wade each day when he goes to sit as judge at the ash of Yggdrasil. And for the bridge of the Aesir burns all with flames, the sacred waters spoiled. So again, we've got movement into the site, and this is repeated again and again and again in the Eddic poetry. Again, it also, movement to the assembly also then appears in many of the provincial laws as well. Let's see, we have got it here, we've got stanza 30 of Grimnismal, when they, so the gods and goddesses, right to sit as judges at the assembly, for example. And the 3 stanzas then of the Völuspá use the phrase, then all the powers went to their thrones of fate, which is interpreted as the assembly. Also, the idea of taking an oath, possibly, I mean, this etymology can be discussed, but it's possible that it goes back to an Indo-European oitus walk, going to an oath, swearing. And also, the Icelandic, the Orðin Graugaus, talks about the ritual procession, setting out the boundaries, and this specifically says that this created the sacred area of the Thinghelgir. So the sites then at Arnarshög and Gamla Uppsala, they have theatrical characteristics, with the open area serving as the stage, perhaps in the mounds as platforms for speakers, platforms for spectators, sorry. And taking into consideration the integrated role of mythology and law, and the suggested performance of mythical plays as part of funerals, it could be suggested that the rituals at the 2 sites involved also perhaps enacting poems, perhaps such as Grimnismal, with the ruler and the close allies entering the sacred space. Terry Gunnell, for example, has stressed the dramatic character of Eddic poems and suggested that they were intended to be performed and that they can be seen as elementary plays. Just as the Icelandic assembly procession, such rituals may then have been performative. So now I ask you to use your imagination. So we don't have any sort of definite evidence of the ritual activities that were played out at the site. We can perhaps then imagine these Vendel period warriors with their striking helmets and clothing, embodying the poem, wearing elaborate helmets, clothing, jewellery, glimmering in the light from the fires, riding into the sacred space. And these events and performative acts may have been derived from mythology, or they represent mythology and poetry in the making, sort of drawing on existing beliefs and traditions, as these are all, of course, ever-changing, ever in movement and transition. So in addition then we've got some sources, for example, Landnámabók, talking about ritual restrictions, taboos that were applied to sacred sites. So people were not allowed to bring the weapons or use violence within the space. So this again emphasizes the ritual nature of the sites. So I'm going to just wrap up and conclude, and I think the main point I'm trying to get through to you is that the ruler's power relied on people attending the assembly. I think they call althing for a reason that everyone was intended to be there, but they're also holding an assembly that nobody attends is pointless. So the people needed to be there, listening to the proceedings, partaking in communion rituals, watching elite rituals, and the whole setup of the site. Above all these sites that are at the very top level of the assembly hierarchy were intended as performative rituals aimed at giving the wider population a feeling of being included, and thus owning and sharing the laws, and also at the same time boosting the power of the elite. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Do you want to open for questions? No.
Yes, I'm interested in the aerial photograph you showed us of the new structure at Gamla Uppsala.
Go back. Let's see what's... no. Sorry. Yeah, this is one.
Yes. The road seems to respect the structure. And I was wondering whether there was any kind of cultural memory, or as the road was built, perhaps before Tarmac, whether the structure was still visible?
No, this is the interesting thing. I mean, of course, yes, this is absolutely ancient. And because they were building a new road and a new tunnel, and when they started removing kind of the old road surface, this turned up.
Okay, so the road postdates the structure. Okay.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes. So this one is new.
Okay.
This one is new. So they removed that and thought, oh, there's something else underneath, and they found it. And there were sort of cartwheel marks and everything along there. Yeah, so that's how it goes.
Right, thank you very much again, Alex, for a really interesting paper. I was just wondering, have you been able to find out what kind of trees were actually making the demarcation there?
I don't know whether they, because they have some wood remains out of Uppsala. When I spoke to them last, they had not. I don't know if anyone else has heard any new updates on the wood, but they were sending them for analysis.
Okay, so they got enough for analysis.
Well, they were hoping.
Probably,
They were
yeah.
hoping there would be. But we don't know if we can get a chronological date. But they weren't sure, but they were hoping. So it's definitely been sent off anyway. And in our post holes, we actually didn't have any wooden remains at all. So for us, it was a simple interpretation that it was difficult for them to have been stoned because it looked so much like a post hole, but just sort of diamond size.
I think one of the things that's also worth putting into the mix is that these very substantial posts, I mean, they could also be surfaces for carving and for painting and things, and I think that gives a really very evocative image as well. And I was kind of struck. I was travelling in Chatham Islands, just off New Zealand, and the Moriori culture there, where they carve actually the living tree, or they carved the living trees. So even if you include tree bowls in your on your line of posts, huge posts, still could be decorated. So I think it's an important element to.
I think you're right, and that would absolutely stress the striking nature of them. So yes, thank you for that.
Question? Yes.
Yeah, actually, just following up from that, there is the marvellous carved post from Ballachulish in the National Museum, Colleen, isn't there? Yeah. Which is an Iron Age post, but is well worth having a look at. It's one of the very earliest wooden carved artefacts, I think, from Scotland. My main point was I just wanted to raise a question about these wooden monuments being used by itinerant rulers. Is that what I understood you to say? Is this because you think the wood is not long-lasting, that it's sort of more of an impermanent?
Well, that's the interesting thing. If you compare them to standing stones, yes, they are very impermanent. And I mean, I was discussing this with various people, and we don't know how long. We're guessing that. I mean, because they're in, these very surrounded by stone more or less, so they would probably have lasted quite a long while. So, like a very conservative estimate then is that they will last 150 years. But if I can go. The interesting thing, is you see this map here from 1689. You see this line here that goes through the field. That we were thinking that was the remains of the monument, and it is. It actually matches on. That's present on every single map. So it's probably with us there for a long time to be seen. And
so was it still there in 1689?
The monument wasn't there, but there was obviously remnants going through the field still in 1689. So we were toying with the idea, did they pull the post up, did they just let them rot in situ? Probably let them rot. And we don't know, but we couldn't see that they could be dented and something had been pulled out. There was no evidence of that. So if that symbolises the ruler and then power waning and the monument waning and something else is put in place, maybe stones raised or something. But I think we think perhaps wood is very short-lived, but if it lasts like 150, 200 years, that's quite a long time anyway.
I mean, what comes to mind is Stonehenge.
Yes.
Woodhenge and all these.
Yes.
I mean, it's all very parallel, isn't it? I know. I mean, the prehistorians, are great with their imagination.
Yes, I have borrowed a lot from prehistorians.
Okay, I think we have time for two more questions. We're here and
a very interesting lecture. Thank you. It was very, 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 very informative in me. I didn't know this much about Arnholmsberg. That was very. But
Yeah.
I think of a parallel that's like 200 years later, the Yelling Monument,
Yes. I
which
know.
is also deliberately pulled down by the king's son because he just wants to sort of erase his dad. But it's also a monument for the dead, and it's also a monument for the surrounding people to show. I mean, he cut down every oak that was around and built these enormous
Yes.
wooden walls. That is very, which is also seems to be. What it struck me when I saw these
Yes.
ship formations.
Yes, I know there are these absolutely striking similarities, and I haven't really quite yet managed to get my head around Yelling and what's...
Because it's also enormous.
Yes, and the sort of symmetrical nature of the whole thing, yeah.
And just a follow-up question then, on the rituals. At what time of the day do you think they perform the rituals?
What time? I think it's at night.
It must have been, must
Must, yeah, because there's so much evidence of fire as well, and you know, with helmets and...
Very swift.
Very swift. I got two actually, but very. I noticed that you mentioned this line, this light grey line, that was actually visible on the map from 1699. I mean, if that is also part of the long structure, how long is it then?
Well, the thing is...
Have you an idea? I mean, the map.
How long it extends this way? Well, we're trying to reconstruct the wetland area here, and my feeling is that the wetland carries on all the way here. So I think we know for definite that there's one post right there, and then I think it's wetland, and then you've got the Esker, which is the massive communication routes that could. So I just think it goes from water to water.
And just a slight one, have you any indication that there was some sort of, the situation between Arnholmsberg and Gamla Uppsala, I mean, where they are there any evidence that they were actually...
No, I mean, it's just that they're so close and there are these similarities. And it's also actually based on today because they're always competing who has the biggest mound.
Well, let's thank Alex once again.